didn't get excited. We had this other one. I thought, boy, I hope he doesn't get excited and hit the back of his laptop or everything. Okay, I guess we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Hope everybody had a good lunch. We'll start off with Chief Osterlund.
Afternoon, President Culver, Commissioners, Director Talbot. As requested from the September Commission meeting in Gillette, we've compiled some information on the Flaming Gorge reciprocal stamp agreement that we have with Utah. So what I've got is just some statute information. These statutes were put into place in about the early 60s when the reservoir was built. It just gives the Commission authority to get into a reciprocal stamp agreement. One thing I want you to kind of notice through this is that licensing of fishing of residents in this state and adjoining states. So this 23-1-801 kind of refers, in my mind, that it's referring to Utah, since it's a man-made impoundment and it straddles the state lines of Wyoming and of Utah. This is a subsection of 801 as well. The agreements may include provisions, and it just goes talk about authority. Then we get into 23. There's three different statutes. 23-1-803. Again, it talks about mutually enjoyed by the residents of Wyoming and the residents of adjoining states. And then we get into 23-1-804, just, again, authority. Currently, right now, this is Section 30 of our current fishing regulation. And it states a person may utilize a valid Wyoming fishing license to fish in Utah portions of the Flaming Gorge if they have a conservation stamp. And then it also states that if a person may fish the Wyoming side of Flaming Gorge if they have a Utah license. We have a current agreement, and the current price is $10. The stamp has been set at $10. This agreement may be terminated in 90 days by either state once we give written notice. This current agreement's been in effect since 1995. So we've had this $10 price on the reciprocal stamp since 1995. The agreement was put into place and signed in 1963. So it went into effect in 1964. Again, that was when the reservoir was built. It was $3 up until 1985, and then it went to $5 until 93. There was no agreement in 94 and 95 because Utah and Wyoming could not come to management agreement of the reservoir. And that is part of the agreement. And since 1996, it's been $10, so quite a while. Revenues average about $86,000 for the last 5 years. So this graph just shows you a little bit about how the stamp sales have went since 1976. It fluctuates, and that fluctuation mostly is due to regulation changes or fishing quality in the reservoir. and different things like that. And then you can see where we had the gap where there was no agreement at that time. And we have this current data we have right now is up 2016. You'll see where it's at. We're in 2016 we sold about 9,000 stamps. So this pie chart indicates, as you would expect, most of the stamps are being sold to Utah residents. But we are selling stamps to Colorado residents, California residents, Idaho residents, and then some other states, 3.5%. So we've got about 13.4% of our stamp sales are going to non-residents other than Utah. So our regulation currently allows that because it says a person. It doesn't say Wyoming resident or Utah resident, it says a person. So if you were to look at, take that 13.4% off of that 9,000 just for year 2016, you'd be looking at about 1,206 stamps. So if all those 1,206 people bought a yearly resident fishing license in Wyoming, and subtracted off that $10 that they would have or have been purchasing, we're looking at about $113,000, almost $114,000, if we made the agreement so that it was, or regulation, I should say, so it is valid just for Utah residents and Wyoming residents, and exclude the other non-residents.
Alan, can I interject?
Absolutely.
Does that include the cost of the habitat stamp they would also have to purchase then?
Yeah, so that figure I just gave you, President Culver, was based on them buying an annual fishing license and the conservation stamp.
Okay. Conservation stamp, excuse me.
So it's a brief presentation, but you know, obviously in our mind there are production costs on the gorge. We've been at the current agreement since 1995, so I think that you know, $10 is pretty cheap for the opportunity that we're providing them. And right now, going back to the other states, what's happening quite a bit is that it's $75 for a person to purchase a non-resident Utah license, and it's $104.50 for a person to buy a Wyoming resident license and the conservation stamp. So some of these non-residents that's come to our attention from other states like California and Colorado have found out that, hey, I can go to Utah, I can buy a $75 license, purchase a $10 stamp. That's $85. It's cheaper than Wyoming. I can fish the whole reservoir. So again, we're missing out on some revenue there. Possibly missing out on revenue as far as the stamp is concerned. So I think there are some opportunities for us to increase our revenue on the gorge and still stay in agreement with Utah. We really don't have a good sense of what the public thinks in that Green River Rock Springs area or other places that utilize the gorge right now, what they would be willing to pay. But obviously they're getting a benefit by being able to fish Utah for $10 right now.
So. Go ahead, Mark.
For the benefit of the other commissioners, can you tell them what you stock down there? You got kokanee and rainbows and.
Commissioner Anselmi, we stock rainbows. We manage for lake trout. We manage for smallmouth bass, catfish, kokanee. There's some brown trout in there right now. So we've got lots of different species, but the bulk of the reservoir is in Wyoming. So, and of course, we think that fishing's better.
It is.
On the Wyoming side. So.
Okay, so Alan, the rate, the charge for this stamp, is that set in statute, or is that something the commission has the authority to set?
That is set by agreement with the commission and the Utah Commission. So it's a separate agreement. The statute gives you authority to enter into an agreement with, in this case, Utah. So since the last time the agreement was signed was in 1995, and that was decided that it would be at $10. So,
So, excuse me, it's $10 for a Utah resident or some other non-resident to purchase it in Utah to fish Wyoming, but it's $12.50.
I'm not sure on that in Utah. I don't know, Dirk, maybe you have an idea? It should be the same since
It
it's
is
agreement.
$10 also
Yeah.
for Wyoming residents to fish in Utah. Pardon?
So what he's saying is all the stamps that we sell are, well, I'll let you speak.
Mr. President, when Wyoming sells a reciprocal stamp, we sell them to people with a Utah license. And when Utah sells a reciprocal stamp, they sell them to people with a Wyoming license. So if you can't come buy your Wyoming fishing license from us and your stamp to fish the gorge. If you want to fish the Utah side with a Wyoming license, you got to buy it from them. So when we sell 8,000 or 9,000 of those a year, we're selling those to people that are coming with a Utah license to fish on the Wyoming side. Similarly, they sell 1,000 or 2,000 a year to people from Wyoming who are gonna, with a Wyoming license, are gonna go fish that side.
And is that the number, 1,000 to 2,000 a year? Wyoming residents that buy a license to fish in Utah?
Wyoming license holders, not necessarily
Wyoming license
residents.
holders, excuse me. But about 9,000 Utah license holders buy a stamp to fish the Wyoming side.
Correct. I don't know what the proportion of how much larger their population is than ours, but we sell more stamps than they
You
do,
got more
about
fish.
4 times more.
Mr. President,
Yes, Pat.
why are we, I mean, I tend to agree to your interpretation of the statute, Alan, so why are we selling licenses to people? I mean, it sounds like the only thing you have to do to buy one of these stamps is show up with a Utah resident or non-resident fishing license, correct?
That's correct.
So why are we doing that? It appears to be in opposition to our statutory authority.
Commissioner Crank, I don't have the answer for that, how that ever goes. Because, yeah, Dirk is correct, because we always have.
And then, Mr. President, is it,
Yes.
Alan told us that the $10 is set by mutual agreement between Wyoming and Utah. So if we wanted to hike that to 20 or 50 or 5 million, we would have to have Utah, we'd have to go back and negotiate that fee with Utah, correct?
That is correct, Commissioner Crank. And one thing, if we don't come to agreement, we don't have a stamp. So anybody that fishes Wyoming, whether it's Utah resident or California resident, would have a non-resident Wyoming license, and vice versa, Utah. Any Wyoming resident wants to go to Utah, you'd have to have either an annual Utah license or an annual non-resident daily Utah license. So as I mentioned, kind of refresh your memory from last commission meeting, we were approached in a meeting with Utah back in the summer, where they wondered if we needed the agreement anymore. But their thought on that was that we could just fish the reservoir if we had if there was a Utah license or a Wyoming license, just go wherever you need to. We didn't think that was such a good idea, but I have talked with their chief since then, and I think that you know, that we'd probably get some resistance to raising the stamp with Utah. But I think it's the right thing to do, and obviously, if we can't come to agreement, we don't have a reciprocal stamp. I think the key question is how much is enough and how much is too much as far as raising the stamp. That's why I think the public process would probably be important to gauge what Wyoming residents are willing to pay.
Mr. President?
Yes.
Alan, could you give me the numbers again that you stated if we don't have the agreement, or if we have our Utah fishermen or people that come through Utah buy a Wyoming resident fishing or Wyoming fishing license, what the added benefit is to the department?
Yeah, so Commissioner Smith, there's a couple things, and I'll show you. I stole some or borrowed some numbers from Jean that she had presented to you guys last meeting, so I'll bring those up. But so if we, as far as the regulation is concerned, and we did not sell stamps to California residents, Colorado residents, Idaho residents, and any other state non-residents, and they were required to buy a non-resident Wyoming full-price annual license and conservation stamp. That would be about $126,000. If you subtract those $10 that they, have been purchasing, it's about $114,000.
That's the added benefit.
That's the added benefit there.
And that's assuming that they purchase an annual fishing license.
That's correct.
What would it be if they just purchased the 3-day or 5-day license, which
Well,
they do?
And I didn't try to figure it that way because it's hard to know what proportion.
So that's the maximum benefit.
Right. Let me get to the end here. So this is the information that Gene put together. So as a 5-year average stamp sales, you're looking at that much, and if that was based on the 8625 instead of 9,000, and then if all those people were required to purchase a non-resident annual, you're looking at 900,000. But like you indicated, there would be probably quite a few would be purchasing dailies or so.
So this might not be a fair question, but do you have any idea, Dirk, you might want to stay up here. Do you have any idea what it costs us per year for our stocking efforts and our patrol efforts, what it costs us to maintain that fishery? No.
President Culver, we don't, but
We do stock that yearly, is that correct?
yes, we do on some species. Yeah, it's pretty low cost to us because it comes from a federal hatchery. As far, but still, we have production costs, we have management costs. We population sample and personnel, and so
And law enforcement.
law enforcement as well. Yeah. So, I think that one thing to bear in mind is that the stamp was designed to provide a benefit to Utah and Wyoming residents so they could fish the entire gorge. And, so there is a benefit, definitely, I think, for people to be able to do that residence-wise. I think we need to find that sweet spot, and if they feel that they're getting a benefit out of that stamp still, keep providing it, but at a potentially higher cost. And definitely, I think we have the option of looking at our current regulation, because our next fishing regulation cycle is 2018. So it's coming up. So if we're going to change the regulation that stipulates a person may purchase a Utah fishing license and then buy a Wyoming stamp, we could change that possibly to say a Utah resident may purchase, with a valid fishing license, may purchase a Wyoming stamp.
Mr. President, do we have any other lakes that border adjoining states? I mean, Bear Lake, Yellowtail.
Yellowtail, Palisades, Commissioner Crank.
Okay.
But this is
the
the
only
only,
have this stamp agreement, right?
that's correct.
Okay.
Mr. President.
Yes, Mark.
Alan, in talking to you, what'd you tell me that the Utah guy said about Bear Lake? Bear Lake is on the Utah-Idaho border. What did he tell you, that they don't?
So, and that was kind of what I think precipitated their comment to us, is that they have an agreement right now with Idaho, Utah with Idaho, where if you have an Idaho license, you can fish all of Bear Lake. If you have a Utah license, you can fish all of Bear Lake. So there's no stamp agreement. So from a regulation standpoint, it's real simple. But from a
Well, that's not near the, Bear Lake fishery is not even close to Flaming Gorge, but that was an interesting comment that they had. And I do want to recognize Representative Flintner. Can you put that back on there? I'm gonna get on my soapbox for the 10th time. It costs $14 for non-resident to fish for one day, and Representative Flintner and Miss Senator Peterson isn't here. That's a crime. Those guys will go down there and fish below the dam on that stretch of water, and they'll pay an outfitter $350 or $400 a day to fish that, and they can buy a license. Well, that's in Utah, but you go to the North Platte River or the Snake, and they're paying these outfitters, and God bless them. I mean, if you can get it, charge it, but they're paying us $14, and we're providing all the fish and all the habitat and all the things we do, and we're only getting $14. So that's a crime, right? That's just one thing, but this stamp thing needs to be adjusted too.
And with that, I do want to recognize Representative Flintner, who has joined us. Welcome. And at any time, if you would like to approach the podium and address the commission, you are more than welcome. Thank you for coming. So one of the things we have to bear in mind here is the APA. What can we do and what can we not do in accordance with the APA? Now, this is a regulation, and it's my understanding in visiting with our AG DeWalt that we cannot change this regulation unless we take it before the public first. But I think I would encourage this commission to direct the department to take it to the public, whether we want to maintain this agreement in the future and what the price of this agreement should be in the future if we do maintain it. Because right now it seems like it's an awfully good deal for residents of Utah and, unfortunately, other states, some other states as well. David?
Mr. President, we could go through our standard APA process here. That's what we would need to do. So we have two components, as it's been outlined for you today. One would be the negotiation with Utah about a new agreement. We could certainly cancel that agreement with 90 days notice, and we might start negotiations now. That might be a good first step to take. And the second step being that eventually we need to bring our regulation into compliance with the statute and whatever the will of the commission may be, and we can just engage in a normal public process to do that, like we do all of our other regulatory changes.
Yes, Pat.
No, I don't think that you.
Can you turn your mic on?
That we make our regulation comply with existing statute. I mean, we shouldn't be selling these to people from California and Idaho, and I mean that seems to be inconsistent with our statutory authority. So,
Agreed.
Yes.
Do we need to talk about a price right now, or do you just bring it up for people that we're going to raise a price, or do you tell them we're going to go to?
well, Mr. President and Commissioner Anselmi, I think we ought to talk to our folks over there. You know, I think there's a lot of it's your country, but I think there's a lot of people fish the gorge. It's an incredible fishery, and we ought to find out what those folks who use that resource think should be paid. I mean, maybe they think it's $50, or maybe they think it's $100, or maybe it's too expensive now. I don't know. I don't know if we can set a price till we hear from the public.
So how would this work? Then you go out next year to talk about fishing regulations and then get people's input, and then we go to negotiate with Utah, and we say, yeah, our constituency tells us we want to raise this to $30, or do we, I don't know how all this falls into place.
We maintain Utah in this loop so that we don't want to take anything to the public that we're not going to be able to work with our neighboring state on.
I think the best approach would be to discuss this and negotiate it with Utah now. And before you adopt a final regulation, we take out that proposal to the public with whatever is negotiated, and we say if that's $10 or it's $20 or whatever it may be, we give the public notice that the department is proposing to the commission to change that price to X amount of dollars, and then we receive public comment on that, and then it'll be brought before the commission to make a final determination. If your determination is that the agreement that is struck is we didn't find that sweet spot, then we go and need to renegotiate the amount again. We could certainly do that. But I think probably the best way is to start discussion with Utah before we go through the regulatory change.
Or it's possible that if we are not at all successful in our negotiations, we might take it before the public just to do away with this stamp.
Right. Dirk, is that?
Mr. President, one thing I would add from a timing perspective, then the agreement with Utah needs to be first, and we would need to get that done as we start our fishing regulation cycle for next year. We certainly would need to have an agreement in principle by probably March. As we start our fishing regulation process cycle for next year, by July, we're going to bring you the proposed regulations in July for 2018. Included in the Chapter 46 fishing regulation is the language about the stamp, where we could clarify that it's only available to residents. The actual price of the conservation stamp lives in Chapter 44. You'll probably, I think you annually review that regulation in July. And so, anyway, so there's kind of three separate pieces, I think. We can go to the public with the Chapter 46 piece that just says we've been directed by the commission to get in compliance with statute and only make these available to resident license holders from the other state. And so that kind of is simple. The agreement with Utah in concept needs to include the price, really, by the time we agree with them to get all the way through our regulation cycle, to get all the booklets printed, the stamps printed, the pricing all done. We'll have to get that worked out the first quarter of the year.
Okay. One more quick question. If we do not have this agreement in place, how much of a law enforcement nightmare is it to patrol these waters and enforce the requirement for Wyoming licenses on the Wyoming side of that large reservoir?
Mr. President, members of the commission, that state line is very clearly marked, and we could certainly address the law enforcement aspects of it.
Good to know. Good to know. Okay. Other discussion, other questions? Mark?
Mr. President, I still don't understand how you can go negotiate. You're just going to go to Utah and say we're going to raise the price. Don't you need some kind of number to throw at them, or what kind? I don't know how you guys negotiate. And that's just by watching TV, hearing about all this negotiation stuff. But anyway,
We don't have President Trump helping us negotiate. I believe it would be part of the discussion, to talk to them about what's fair. In my mind, our annual license on January 1 of this year will be at right around $125. If they're paying $30, they're getting a heck of a deal. If our people are paying $30, that's less than half of an annual license in Utah. That'd be where I'd start. But I think we would need to work that out with them. They might just walk away from it. I don't know, Director Talbot, how you would envision. I think it's a negotiation.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, I certainly think that we can begin those discussions. My impression is that Utah is not going to be interested in negotiating the price of the stamp, but we can explore that as we go.
But the fact remains we are holding more cards than they are. Now, that might not sit well with some people down in that country that have a Wyoming license and want to fish the Utah side of the reservoir. I don't know, but the majority of the reservoir is in Wyoming, and I think it's largely agreed that the better fishing is in Wyoming. And we are on the short end of this deal right now, so. Do you feel that the department needs any further direction?
I don't. Okay. I was gonna ask Ken sell me for his price. What do you want to ask for, Mark? $1 million?
I was gonna ask you, you're better at this than I am.
No, I'm not. I mean,
No, not $1 million, maybe $500,000, but I don't know. Well, $10 since 1995, what the, geez, that's a crime.
I mean, it almost seems like it'd be better for the department and Wyoming to just do away with the stamp altogether.
yeah, we have 9,000 Utah people fishing on our side of the gorge and
And we got a minimum
1,000 going the
advantage
other
of
way.
120,000, a maximum of 900,000 based on the numbers we see there, plus all the added economic benefit of people buying annual Wyoming fishing licenses that may bring them in the state for other lakes and activities.
Yeah, I agree. I think we need to enter these negotiations fully realizing that we are willing to just cancel the agreement. You know, if we cannot reach a reasonable agreement with Utah. And the provision where this is only open for residents of Utah and residents of Wyoming, will that be part of the negotiation as well?
President Culver, I've already spoken with the chief down there in Utah about that, and he was going to check in to see how they're doing it down there as far as how they're selling those stamps. So we've already talked about it.
Okay. If not, I suppose the commission could certainly change the regulation for the Wyoming, yeah,
That's correct.
okay. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you very much. We have been joined by former Representative Lane Harvey. Lane, welcome. Good to see you here. Our next presenter is, oh, excuse me. Mr. Grant, I apologize. I didn't mean to slight you there.
President Culver, Commissioner Talbot, members of the commission. I listened to this. I'm scared to say anything. I'd like to talk about a reciprocity agreement with Montana for Bighorn Lake. To give you a little background, in 1960, when the habitat was formed, during 1960 and 1966, 73 farm families were displaced out of our level area. 30,000 acres disappeared from the tax rolls. We took an awful hit in our local community. It's not a third of what it was when we had those 73 farm families. We were promised a tourism industry that would replace the agricultural community with full development of Bighorn Canyon National Recreation Area. This has never happened because the road was never built tying the north end and the south end together, which would have given us up to, in those studies, up to 2 million visitors a year, up to 40% of Yellowstone Park's visitation. We think that the Billings folks have a lot better access through Wyoming to Horseshoe Bend than they do to Oka Bay at the dam. And if we had a reciprocal agreement where it was easier for them to fish in Wyoming and then boat into Montana, why we think it would draw a lot more economic development to our local community. And it's probably better for Wyoming than it is for Montana because more of the lake is in Montana than is in Wyoming. But the economic development of the local community is something we'd kind of like you to take a look at. I don't know whether this agreement could be made with Montana or not, but it would be a good benefit for our local community if we had those people out of Billings all coming down to Horseshoe Bend to boat rather than going the longer way around to Oka Bay and the dam. Representative Harvey and I, we've been working on this for over 10 years.
We're a package deal. We work.
We worked with Pat on getting water in the lake. When we started, why the dam was being managed for the river below the dam. And now we have an agreement that we've got a balanced management for the lake levels and river flows. And we have a good fishery in Wyoming now, and we'd kind of like for you to consider this. Representative Harvey's a better talker than I am. She's probably got some.
With your permission.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. As you know, I retired from the legislature and was very adequately, and she's actually exceeds my talents, Representative Flitner. But I have not lost my passion for replacing Lovell's economy with a tourism economy. In fact, I thought I had retired, but instead I just retreaded, and I now am the executive director of Lovell Inc., which is our economic development organization. And one of the things that we are continually looking at is ways to bring people into Lovell to reestablish. I've got 2 investors that are ready to build a motel, 2 different motels in Lovell. Everything is right on the edge. If. And we can't assure them of a tourism economy because we cannot get the Crow tribe to allow us to build that road, 35 miles of road that would, it was originally intended that the tourists would detour from the Black Hills region and kind of come follow this national park tour, and they envisioned the Bighorn Canyon National Recreation Area as a place where it could take some of the pressure off of Yellowstone. If people stayed 1 or 2 nights here on their week-long or 2-week-long vacation, then that would give us the tourism economy that we were promised. To love the federal government. We're still waiting. We're still waiting since the dam closed in 1967. We're still waiting. Everything that we can do that will encourage visitorship here will allow us to recover our economy. We have a page down at the office that has it's about this big, and it's in a 12 font, and it lists the businesses, single space. It lists the businesses that were in Lovell, in operation in 1960. And I can tell you that we had 3 lumber yards. We had 5 new car dealerships. We had 7 grocery stores. We had J.C. Penney's. We had Anthony's. We had Bill Powell's, which that's where you got the best of the best in Lovell, Wyoming. We had the Elite Shop. We had Keller Shoes. We had a vibrant, active community. Now, I can't blame all of the loss of downtown Lovell on the dam, on the loss of the 72 family farms. But I can tell you that it has made a tremendous difference, losing that economy that we had. Now, I wouldn't want to paint a picture of total gloom and doom, because we still have a very active and vibrant sugar factory. I'm sure that you noticed our tunnel beats on your way to the community center. We still do have, but what we miss is the stability of farm families. They do create local business. They create it, they patronize it, they keep it alive and growing and vibrant. But I can tell you that it is difficult to buy a pair of men's socks in Lovell today. There are some things we just simply have to leave town to be able to get. We cannot regain our economy. We cannot encourage enough staying power until we have more of our economy rebuilt. reciprocity of fishing licenses is what you are about, and that is the topic of the discussion. I would strongly encourage you to consider this as a statewide policy, that if there are waters that we are in common with other states, can't we find a way to make it work? I also would remind you that for years, the Wyoming Game and Fish Commission and the Wyoming Game and Fish were considered an enterprise agency, and that is that you paid your way. The fees that you collected paid the bills that you incurred. But in my term in the legislature, I know that I voted more than once for large amounts of money to come to this commission to be distributed to increase habitat, to improve habitat, and to be able to function because of some of the loss of income that you've had and the increase of responsibilities and the increase of costs incurred, especially with endangered species. Happily, we gave it then. As a former legislator, I'm just asking that you consider reciprocity as one of the ways that you can make our area whole again. It's one of the pieces of the puzzle. You are not the puzzle. You're not even the border of the puzzle. But it is a part of the puzzle that is a very needed and necessary part of the tourism economy, and that is the fishing part. And so when we get reciprocity, we get a larger visitorship. They buy gas here. They buy a meal here. We want them to stay here. We want other things, and I'm actively working on, and we do have projects that are in the works to increase visitorship here. I'm just asking that as you consider the Flaming Gorge issue, please consider the Bighorn Lake issue as well and help us regain what we lost. We bought a package deal that we shouldn't have purchased. And I can tell you that those 73 families, one lived next door to us for quite a while. She's now in the nursing home, and the bitterness never left. People were bitter about losing their farms, about their farmland being condemned. Our community has had some hard feelings about the losses that we've incurred since that time. It seems as though Mother Nature and the coming and going of water in the lake has had some play in that, but also a change in culture. And I would commend the Game and Fish employees that helped us as we advocated for a full lake, and helped us as we worked at getting an appropriate fishery on the lake. It exists. It's there. We'd like to see more people partake of it. And part of that are those people that you can, anywhere in Montana, it's faster for them to get on the lake through Lovell. And we would like to be able to make that more accessible and something that we can then advertise and bring more people here. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Mr. President. Elaine and Keith, are you guys advocating that just if you have a Montana fishing license, you can come fish on Yellowtail, or are you talking about a fee structure like we have on Flaming Gorge, or what's your idea?
Well, I don't believe in giving anything away for free if we incur a cost because of it. I think that if we could sit down with Montana and have some kind of agreement to where if you have a Montana license, you can buy a Wyoming stamp. If you have a Wyoming license, you can buy a Montana stamp. And quite frankly, if you have a Montana license and you live in Montana and you bring your Montana boat and launch in Wyoming and cross not too very far down the canyon and cross into Montana and only fish in Montana, if there is a game warden at Horseshoe Bend when you dock and your cooler is full of your limit of fish according to your Montana license, how can you prove that? I think that it would be best practices if we could have an addition to what they're already doing, whether it's buying a Wyoming stamp for your Montana license or vice versa. And a similar arrangement for those people that are not Wyoming or Montana residents, that they could buy a 3-day license that both states could benefit from. So no, I don't believe that just because you have a Montana license, you should be able to fish in Wyoming waters without incurring any kind of cost.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Mr. President, may I?
Yes.
I'd like to publicly thank you guys for former Representative Elaine Harvey and former Commissioner Keith Grant for all the decades of service you guys have. I don't say that because you're old. I say that because you guys. I thank you personally. Thank you. So decades of service to the people of Wyoming. Thank you.
Mr. President,
Still working for Wyoming.
I would pile on, because when Keith Grant and Elaine Harvey show up at your door, even if you're the Wyoming Attorney General, you quiver. And they would bring me great stuff to work on, and we got some cool stuff done, but they're formidable advocates for the Bighorn Basin. So thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we will take your discussion under advisement. Rest assured, we will be discussing it. Thank you for coming forth today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Where are we at?
Mr. President,
Yes.
before we go on, why don't we, if it'd be appropriate, we have Title 18 fishing regulations coming in front of us, pretty quick? Well, let me suggest Mr. President, if the commission supports it, I would suggest, just as one commissioner, that we try to begin negotiations with Montana over some type of structure like we have with regard to Flaming Gorge. It doesn't make much sense to have it on Flaming Gorge and not have it on Yellowtail. I mean, it just seems to me that if we can make sure that this is fair to Wyoming, that this is an issue that we ought to pursue. So we probably ought to start those discussions pretty quick.
Okay, so it's clear in statute that we have the authority to enter into those agreements. And I think the commission has made it clear today that they want an even-handed agreement. I agree with Pat. I think it's fair to have the department begin those negotiations and that work. Any other discussion? I don't think we need a vote on it, but any other discussion?
I agree.
And one thing, Mr. President, we've got Palisades Reservoir too, would you do the same thing with Idaho, or you just leave that alone until that issue?
Anybody here from Idaho? Nope. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, Mike?
Well, I've never heard any discussion about it over there. Complaints one way or the other, so I just don't know if we, start with Utah and we start with Montana, that news will get out.
I believe it'd be a good time to start with Montana. I think, and see where it goes. And then we can take it one step at a time. And
One lake at a time.
absolutely.
Rennie, before you begin, we've got a young lady, I believe, Victoria, from the Chamber of Commerce that showed up here today. We'd like to invite to the podium because we like her better than you, Rennie. Yeah. You do.
Oh my goodness.
Talk
Okay.
really loud.
On behalf of, wow, that's loud. On behalf of the Lovell Area Chamber of Commerce, many businesses and banks, and the town of Lovell, we thank you guys for coming. We welcome you guys, and we hope to see you guys again soon, real soon.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Victoria, thank you.
Supper tonight.
No, 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 no.
I got one right here, I got one.
Do you have anything for us, Rennie? I mean, not Tom. Do you have
Mr. President,
anything to
yeah,
give us?
I did not bring any gifts. I now know where the bar is, and next time, if I want to stay on the agenda.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Mr. President. Great to be here, and I think as you voted earlier, I think it is really important to get around the state, and we sure hear that a lot. And again, to Commissioner Rael, I think this has been an incredible day, and we've got more fun stuff ahead of us. So I'll look forward to the open house here this evening. So I'm going to jump in and just keep you updated every meeting until June, when we're aiming to have this done. So probably at the July meeting, we'd be presenting the final strategic plan for the department and the commission to you. But so between now and then, every meeting I'll be here to just update you on how things are going, and if we have any more specifics to talk to you about. But a couple of good points and good events for the public engagement process to report out. The director mentioned that last week the Travel, Recreation, and Wildlife Committee met with Representative Flittner, a member of that committee, and we got an update from Ryan Lance, who is the chair of the Governor's Fish and Wildlife Resource Task Force. And so as he went through draft recommendations with the committee, and in his letter to the governor, he commended the commission for its investment in this public engagement process, not only because it was something that came out of the program review of the department, but also I think just because it seemed like from his perspective and the task force perspective, it was a very valuable investment to make. So now the question is making sure that it comes off well. So just wanted to update you on where we're at with this process, and just let you know that as the TRW committee heard, and I believe Representative Flittner could say it better than I could, but I believe that there was appreciation that this process had started among legislators as well, and they'll be very interested to see where this all goes. So again, the background was the Wildlife Management Institute's programmatic evaluation of game and fish, looked at those different programs, and definitely looked at the fact that the key recommendation was that we need to continue to talk to our public about priorities and the direction of the agency, so that our public that cares so much about wildlife is kept involved in those big picture discussions. So that got us going, along with the goal of Director Talbot, and the fact that this commission was able to be proactive, I believe, whereas for the first few years of Director Talbot's time in his position was in a very reactive state with cuts to the agency, but now have the opportunity to be proactive and then have this programmatic review that also seconded what the director wanted to get done. So here we are, started out with this process to better understand the public's attitudes, understand what the public thinks about game and fish, and where we should be headed, and then use that data, and a lot of that will be scientifically valid data from telephone surveys, and then also some other data from public meetings and town hall meetings where people can really weigh in and give a lot more detailed qualitative feedback to us that's not necessarily scientifically valid data, but it's very important to understand what people are really feeling. So that's where we're headed. We'll use all that to come up with that 5-year strategy, although acknowledging that there's certain things that we may be putting into our strategic plan that will take more than 5 years, but really trying to come up with a 5-year strategy. So you've seen this before. This is all the different components of this, and essentially we're through the planning phase now. So that was some great work. That just wrapped up last week. We had the pre-survey focus groups in Gillette, Riverton, Rock Springs, Cody, and Cheyenne. And again, the folks who were selected for those focus groups came from different backgrounds. They were randomly selected by responsive management or contractor, and came together we won't know who they are unless, I guess, they sent us their name and kind of volunteered that we would get that. But the purpose is that they could speak anonymously and with a neutral party. No one from Game and Fish could be there. It was a closed event, but it was meant to have really frank conversations with some citizens of Wyoming about what they think about game and fish and the wildlife of the state. So we'll be moving into those next phases next, and I'll kind of talk to you a little bit more about that. But here's what all went into the planning phase that is done. So had a good conversation. Thanks to President Culver for being there for that first event with a workshop with responsive management. Then we started just trying to get into defining what the project's going to be, and so that was the email questionnaire that all of you received, all Game and Fish employees received. We also sent that out to members of the governor's task force because they represented a broad constituency, and then also sent that to some other state agency directors who have a lot to do with game and fish. So the contractor is all set. They're going through the focus group results and transcribing all that to try to pull out some of the key things they heard and the big themes, and they're going to use that to build the telephone survey and some of the other tools that they'll use to hear from the public. But next up is the surveys that will go out. So all that work was to make sure that they could have as strong a survey as possible. And you look at a survey of 2,500 people, that is a very good survey number. In Wyoming, a scientifically valid telephone survey that's done well, you only really need about 400 people to call it a valid survey. So we'll be well above that, and we'll also be going within each region to get some good data. And then we'll also go out to outside of the state, so another 400. So it's 2,900 people total will be surveyed, and 400 of them will be non-resident hunters and anglers. And at about the same time, an email survey will go to Game and Fish employees so that they can weigh in more, I guess it'll be more narrow focus on certain topics so that we have a good sense, an anonymous survey of our employees to kind of understand how employees are feeling about the future of the agency too. After that, this online town hall will get kicked off, and that's being built right now. And so this is a really great opportunity so that anyone, anywhere can weigh in on this issue. So if they can't attend a public meeting, or if they aren't one of the people randomly selected to receive the telephone survey, they can participate and give us their perceptions. And also the contractor will essentially be there to facilitate and moderate the conversation online too. So people may have questions for us or feedback, and can direct that conversation a little bit more and direct it into some very specific topics. So that's something they have used elsewhere and felt like it was a good way to hear from the public. But please stop me at any point if you have any thoughts or questions on any of these specific topics. But after I mentioned the focus groups already happened to kind of help us get some information and some perspectives for developing the survey. They'll go back out to different people after the surveys so that they can have a little bit more conversation with them to kind of get some feedback based on what we do here in the telephone surveys. So that's the difference between qualitative and quantitative data that they'll be trying to get at. So people's opinions versus kind of what are the big trends that you can glean from a good telephone survey. Public meetings, we'll have one in each community where we have a regional office. So we have 8 of those regional offices. Each one of those will host a public meeting. And the public meetings will be facilitated and run by the responsive management with some Game and Fish employees there. These are slated for about February, that time frame. We'll also have one meeting in Cheyenne and one meeting in Gillette to get to 10 across the state and feel like we could get to a pretty good cross-section of Wyoming and give most people a really good opportunity to be able to travel and participate if they want to be at one of these. So when all that's done, which is aiming for the March timeframe, we'll have a report on the feedback that we heard from the public. we'll definitely be sharing that with you, and you'll be having lots of opportunities to look at that, ask some questions of responsive management and others, and then we'll start to build out a strategic plan using all that feedback from the public, and so trying to incorporate that into setting priorities and a direction for the agency. And that's going to be a really neat opportunity, I think, to try to get lots of people from across Game and Fish involved, because this is a plan that, you know, if it's going to have value and really be something that we can all get behind and use and talk to the public about and shape as we go forward too, and adapt as needed. I think people from across this agency are going to have to be a part of it, so we're trying to find as many ways as possible to get people from a wide cross-section of Game and Fish to be involved and part of this. So that's the goal, again, is to have that done in June. And so we'll just be, again, continuing to keep you updated on all of this and presenting you as much data as we can. At this point, the focus groups haven't been completely wrapped up, and I don't think they've wrapped up a summary of the emails that you helped that you participated in that survey that was sent to you from responsive management. So we should be getting that soon, and we'll definitely have some updates in January. And that's where we're at right now. But definitely interested to see if you think we're still on the right track, or if anything has come to you as you went through the email questions that you each received.
How are you feeling about it?
Mr. President, I'm really excited about it myself. This is a big investment that you made, and I think this is a neat time to be here with Game and Fish and being a part of this, because as you all well know, there isn't a strategic plan right now. We don't have even an old one to dust off the shelf. So I think if we can take advantage of this opportunity that you've given us as an agency, and to hear from the public and truly listen, I think that it's going to make a difference for the long term. And the more I talk with responsive management and their contractor who does strategic planning, the more they really point out that this is a pretty amazing process and for the public to be involved as well. So really, you know, it's a big ask for them to be involved in it. But we certainly are trying to create as many opportunities for that to happen. So I hope the public can be a part of it and feel like they were heard here as well. And that's not something that gets to happen very often. I think Director Talbot, when he's talked about this, the last time it happened was about 30 years ago. So
are you getting any feedback from the group on the survey participation or the willingness to serve on focus groups? How's that going?
Mr. President, yeah, the email as it went out, I know the biggest audience for that was Game and Fish employees, and had good response rates relative for such a broad question, and really some questions, as you probably all know, they could take a little while if you wanted to spend some time really digging into some of those questions. They were broad, and I know we had a couple bumps in the road, but what I heard from responsive management as they were looking at the results is they really felt like there was a lot of good information, and the responses and what they provided, the insight they provided, is really helping them. So that's great news. The focus group, again, it was an interesting process. I think some folks in Cwd heard from someone who didn't necessarily believe it was real, because the responsive management was paying participants, because it was asking them to come spend a few hours, take an evening essentially out of their lives to invest in that. And some people were a little puzzled that someone associated with Game and Fish was trying to pay them to come to events. And I think we had a few people around the state who ran into that issue. And so, you know, I think as the next round goes out, hopefully we can do a little bit better about making sure people know that that's actually real, and you know, that this is standard practice too for folks who do a focus group.
Questions for Rennie? Comments? Here. Thank you very much, Rennie.
Well, thank you. I think, again, thanks so much for the investment that you made in this. And, you know, I think that's the big trend we're probably going to see, and that's the kind of first glance and of those people who've been out there working on this is that, boy, the people of Wyoming care about their wildlife, and it came out in the email survey and also in the focus groups. And so, you know, you're entrusted with a great resource, and I think you all know that and work very hard on it every day. So it's a neat time to be doing this. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Mr. President?
Yes.
That was the end of the agenda, but if you'd like, we did have a couple suggestions if you want to take a break or if you want to move right into a couple other topics.
Well, I think we'll take a break first, and I'll visit with somebody about which agenda items will move up. Thank you. So let's meet back here in 15 minutes, please.
I didn't even have a chance to look at this. Everybody's raving about it.
Wow. Bunch of candy in there. Some sugar. Slotted spoon. That was nice of them.
That was really nice of them.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go ahead and reconvene. And we've got Chief Cole up first. Gene, welcome.
Thank you. Mr. President, members of the Commission, and Director Talbot, I'll be presenting Commission Agenda Item number 16, which is the continual renewal of licensed selling agents. Based on Wyoming statute, a licensed selling agent must sell a minimum of $1,000 during a licensing year to have the ability to renew their license account to the next calendar year. Fish-only agents and seasonal agents are exempt from that requirement in state statute. So we have a commission policy every year at this meeting, in November meeting. The license section is required to appear before the commission and inform you of any licensed vendors that have not yet met that $1,000 minimum sales. We have one licensed agent today to inform you of, and that's the Heinz General Store located in Fort Washakie. This is a licensed vendor that was established just last year in the February commission meeting. So they didn't even have a full year last year to complete a calendar year sales to meet the $1,000 minimum sales. And we give the benefit of the doubt to any agent that's appointed during a year not to consider them in the $1,000 if they haven't had a full 12 months of sales. Last year they had $306.50 of sales. So far this year, they've only sold $208.50. So I was here today to ask you to give them a conditional renewal to let them continue throughout the rest of the season, and then come back to you at the January meeting to let you know if they met the $1,000 sales or not. However, I had Brock Anderson, our licensed sales coordinator, reach out to this vendor to ask them if they were having any kind of issues with their license machine or why their sales were so low for this year. And they indicated that the most of their sales this year were during the eclipse season that Brian told you about this morning, and they haven't had a lot of sales. And through conversations with this particular agent of record for this account, they have decided not to continue their license account. And so we have actually already sent them the materials to return their equipment and cancel their account. So I'm not going to ask you today for a motion to allow them to continue their license account into the next year. So that is my presentation, President Colbert.
Gene, I'm curious, what does it cost the department to maintain the equipment for a licensed selling agent per year?
President Culver, we did an analysis, I believe it was back in 2009, where we looked at the cost of the equipment, the cost of administrative efforts from licensing personnel, and also our IT staff that also obviously spends a lot of time helping and assisting our agents with their sales machines and equipment. And the total calculation at that time was, I think, $2,400 per year to maintain an agent. So it's not, you know, a small dollars to have an agent that sells a little bit of inventory. I believe our iPOS equipment runs around $1,000, and then the machine, the printer itself, is about $500. So the majority of that cost is actual equipment provided by the commission to the vendor. The vendor is required to provide their own internet connection, and we provide the equipment.
So for how many years has this $1,000 minimum threshold been in place?
Commission President, in 1996, Director Talbot is laughing because he knows the history behind this change in the statute. In 1996, the legislature changed the statute to allow any vendor, any particular business in the state of Wyoming that is a sporting goods vendor to have the ability to provide hunting and fishing licenses to the public, which you would expect that that would be a reasonable expectation. At the same time, they provided for a person who's not a sporting goods vendor to have an opportunity to do that as well through commission regulation on our process of non-sporting goods. And during that time, they put a provision in for an annual review of all licensed vendors of having that $1,000 minimum sales. That occurred in 1996.
So nearly, well, over 20 years then it's been in place without. Do you foresee a need to increase that, or would that place an undue hardship on some of our vendors? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Mr. President, the $1,000 minimum sales it doesn't take much, as you can imagine, to meet that minimum sales. So I do not believe it would place a hardship on our licensed agents.
If
that
it's
would require a statutory change, of course, to raise that limit.
Oh, that's statutory.
Yes.
But if it cost $2,400 a year to maintain a licensed selling agent that does $1,000 worth of business a year, sounds like another agreement with Utah. I don't know.
Yeah. Certainly, it's something that should be considered when we have that opportunity to look at that statute.
Thank you, Jean.
Thank you.
Mr. President?
Yes, Pat.
Jean, please be careful and just talk about public record stuff. But at the last meeting, there was a licensed vendor in the Sheridan area that we had a lot of trouble with before. And even though I don't carry a grudge, I got outvoted about pulling his tag last time. And I understand he was back in the soup again. Has that resolved itself, or are you going to bring that one back in front of us?
Mr. President, Commissioner Crank, at that commission meeting in September, as you know, we received approval from the commission to suspend that particular licensed vendor. We have ability through regulation to suspend an agent for not paying their monthly license sales reports or not filing reports in a timely manner. So he has been suspended, and he has not requested a hearing before the commission. So when an agent is suspended, they have 10 days to request in writing to the director a request to appear before the commission. That has not happened, therefore the agent is automatically canceled. And the department will be working through collection process to recover the amount due from this vendor, which is approximately $14,000.
Wow. Do we get our equipment back at least?
We are working on that, but yes, we will.
Okay.
We have a really great working relationship with all of our game wardens in the field. They're very helpful with the license section. And if we're unable to get the agent to physically put it in a box and mail it back with the prepaid labels we provide, we do have game wardens go out and make a physical visit to the store to pick up our equipment and our inventory.
Okay. Mr. President, can I go off the beaten track one more time?
You bet.
I was looking, I don't know, a month or so ago, 2 months ago, about at our budget numbers, and I was shocked by the amount of credit card fees that we pay. It was over $1 million. Could you refresh me?
Mr. President, Commission Crank, that is correct. It's a little over $1 million on our annual amount we have reduced from our revenue for credit card fees. And the credit card fees are the fees the department pays for individuals that apply online for licensed limited quota drawings, as well as our internet sales. Those are the two mechanisms in which we are charged credit card fees.
Okay, and as I understand it, different credit cards charge different percentages. Is that accurate? So, for instance, I guess American Express might charge more than Visa, who might charge more than MasterCard, or
President Culver, Commissioner Crank, that is true. But we have a contract with our credit card processing vendor, and we pay a flat fee to that vendor per transaction. So it's not based on the credit card vendor, and we do not accept American Express at the current time.
Okay, and so what is our flat fee? Is it a percentage of the sale?
It's approximately 3%.
Okay. Do you have any idea, or has the department thought about how to reduce that? I mean, reduce that expenditure of $1 million out of our revenue stream?
President Culver, Commissioner Crank, certainly. We had a lengthy discussion at our staff retreat where I proposed 2 different options for the department to consider to address the credit card fees that are charged. One option is to change the method in which we accept applications for our limited quota drawing, and that is to only charge an individual the application fee, and then if that applicant is successful, then charge the card for the full amount of the license price. So with that, you would be just paying a small percentage on the $14, $15 for the non-resident fee and the $7 for the resident fee. The other option is to, through statutory ability, to charge the fee to the customer on top of the price of applying for the license. Those are the 2 options.
Well, and so help me out with this. If I apply for a limited quota elk license online, which I have to apply online now, I can't do paper anymore, right?
That's correct.
I get charged $5 or $7 or what is it for an application fee?
Mr. President, Commissioner Crank, the resident application fee is $7.
And that, I never get that back. I get my...
That's correct. It's retained.
And the... So when we're talking $1 million in credit card fees, are you offsetting the $7 application fee against that, or is that just... I mean, tell me how you're computing that $1 million.
President Culver, Commissioner Crank, the department receives on every transaction that occurs online for applications or for sale, the department receives the full face value of that amount from the credit card vendor. So we receive the dollars in full at the end of the transaction. Then we are invoiced the following month for the amount of the credit card fees, and we remit a payment to the credit card vendor for that. So those dollars are netted out of the revenue received for those transactions.
Okay, and I understand that makes sense to me, but I guess I ask a horrible question, and it's a we're gonna miss you so much when you retire. I mean, it's amazing. I can ask you all these questions and you can tell me off the top of your head. You can answer them off the top of your head, but so we sell a license for $100. There's a 3% fee. And we charge a $7 application fee. So we net, it's a positive to us of what, $4? Is that, am I doing that right?
That's correct. You take the total amount of the transaction. So let's just say that the total amount of the transaction is $100. So we initially receive $100, and then we pay the credit card vendor $3.
But we got, the license only costs $93, and we got a $7 application fee, right?
Yes, and President Culver and Commissioner Crank, the application fee by statute goes into a separate fund to pay for, I believe it's damage claims. So that application fee by statute is not to recover the cost of doing business for issuing licenses. The dollars are put into a separate fund for damage claims. Is that correct, Chief Fiscal Officer?
Okay. All right. So the $1 million is not really $1 million. It's $1 million less what we recoup on application fees minus $500,000. That's an algebra question, but I think that's right?
Yeah, and President Culver, you could say the same thing in terms of like over-the-counter sale of a license. We're paying a license vendor $2 for every license they sell. So, I mean, we're not getting the full face value what the license cost in the department when you consider that as well.
Okay. Mr. President, thank you for allowing me to go off the beaten path there. I was just curious about that.
Thank you.
So can I have a motion that we not allow Gene to retire?
I so moved.
So moved. Second. All in favor? Yes.
Okay, thank you, Gene. With that, Mr. Edberg.
So if we did collect the license, we wouldn't pay the credit card.
Well, wait for the back up one. Samuel, there should be a cover slide. It's even worse.
I do want to hear the background story on that photo when you get to that.
Ready? Thank you. Commissioner President Culver, Commissioner Director Talbot, as part of kind of the continuing education, continuing orientation of new commissioners, we thought the Wildlife Division would do a presentation on the lethal taking of wildlife. And you may ask, why would the commission be interested in that one? I think it's a major component of our job. And two, as a commission, you actually have a role in this in certain situations, which I'll discuss. And some of the tenured commissioners have been called and asked for their permission to take big game species in damage situations. So we thought here'd be a good time just to give an overview of the department employees' roles and lethal taking of wildlife. While it's a necessary and many times an unpleasant task, it's something that our employees do with great pride and respect and professionalism. As you can imagine, many times it's a sad situation, but something that we take to heart and make sure it's done properly and appropriately and with both the wildlife and our publics in mind. So as you see this bear here, this is something that every so often we run into. Bear goes up the power pole, and don't know the exact situation here, but I'm assuming it's maybe an urban situation where the bear here got into a place he shouldn't have been, went up the power pole, and it was not lethally removed in this thing, but if you look right here, that's a dart. That's where they darted him, and what we've done in many of these situations, they'll do like that, dart it, falls asleep, gets on the wire, and then we're prepared for him when he comes to the ground with a tarp or something to catch him, or use some of our other public safety personnel to be there to give us assistance. So this bear just happened to probably be in the wrong spot, needed to find a better place to live than in town and up a power pole. Oops. So this is just a statute that allows the department to remove wildlife in various situations, and then the commission's role. And as you see there in the middle of the commission, the killing is necessary or when the birds are doing substantial damage to property. That's kind of the commission's role, and I'll get to that more in detail later on. So that's the authorizing statute. And if you have any questions at any time, just interrupt. Okay, the statute is then backed up by Chapter 56, the regulation for governing the lethal take of wildlife. And the two parts of that are the first bullet. It provides the permit holders the flexibility to address the need to take wildlife when the taking is necessary, which is key, or when take of bigger trophic animals or game birds are doing substantial damage to property. Again, this gets into our damage situation, our damage regulation and statutes, that sometimes removing the animals that are causing damage is the only way to address the situation. Hazing doesn't work, hunting seasons don't work, every other technique that we have just doesn't work, and sometimes you just have to remove those animals. And a lot of times you remove a couple of them, the others say, this is not a very good place to live, I'm going to go somewhere else. And then the second part is not the purpose of the permits to direct permit holders to take wildlife classified as predatory animals or predaceous birds when such animals or birds are doing damage to property. Again, this only has to do with game animals. So coyotes, foxes, stray cats, skunks, those animals that are classified as predaceous animals or predaceous birds are not covered under our Chapter 56 permit. Those can be pretty much taken 24/7, 365. Commissioner President.
We've got a question for you, Scott.
Mr. President, it's Scott. So what about like cranes that are governed by the interstate, or can you take cranes if they're doing a bunch of damage, like you tried to, or because they're governed, they're
migratory?
Under that, since they're protected, Commissioner President Culver, Commissioner Anselmi, since those are covered under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, we would work with our federal partners and use a lot of times like our hatchery system. They get a federal permit to take like great blue herons or some other birds that take fish, pelicans, and then they get that permit, and then we issue a state permit. And that's a good question. We actually issue ourselves, the department, many permits for the lethal removal of wildlife, which I'll get into that later, but we issue the department employees permits, hatcheries, regional wildlife supervisors permits as well. So it's just not, you're covered under the statute and reg, no paperwork. We're very conscientious to make sure that we have all our bases covered and spell out what can be taken, how it can be taken. But again, I'll get into that in more detail later on.
Thank you.
So just as an example of when we may have to lethally remove wildlife, I'm not going to read them all, but you can see, if looking at those, everything, human health, safety, the animal's distressed, there's need for some science-based research, the damage to trophy game animals doing damage to livestock, beeves, hives, or honey, big game animals and game birds doing damage to cropland or stored crops, meet population objectives, animals have been imported illegally and create a threat to our native wildlife, or animals that has been seized and we returned it to the wild to be a threat. So there's several situations where we may deem the necessary lethal removal. So the damage part, just like our other damage is variable, but again, as I stated earlier, removing the animals causing damage in limited numbers is sometimes necessary. And so the key to this one is the second bullet, that the department believes reasonable measures which have been taken to mitigate the damage have been unsuccessful. So we use lethal removal as a last step to address damage. We just don't go in there the first thing and let's just lethally remove them and that's our solution. We try hazing, fencing, pushing, cracker shells, every tool in our toolbox, and then if those don't work, we consider lethal take. So kind of the administrative side, all of our employees who could or would need to take wildlife lethally actually are issued an actual permit. So our permanent employees, we have two types of cards. We have our Chapter 56 cards, a brown card, which on the upper right is the one with my name on it. That gives me the authorization in very certain circumstances to take wildlife, all species of wildlife. The green card, which is the one there with Stephen's name on it, that is issued to our fish division personnel, and that allows them to take aquatic species in very certain situations. And then Chapter 34 licenses, I'll get into that, but we'll have a regulation, or the commission has a regulation, where we can have depredation hunting seasons, which are outside the established hunting seasons, to take additional animals, again, that are over objective or perhaps are causing damage. And then that Chapter 56 permit in the bottom right is just an example of what an actual permit looks like. That's just part of it, but that is a permit there that we issue to about every airport in Wyoming for human health and safety that allows them to take animals to get within inside the enclosure fence and create a safety hazard to aircraft. That's a big game on a runway, and aircraft landing don't mix very well. And we actually had a very close call here, I believe, this summer at Torrington, where the plane was landing. I think there was antelope on the runway, and luckily everything was avoided. But these permits are critical for allowing them to address wildlife situations in a very timely fashion.
Mr. President?
Yes, Pat.
Scott, when I was a kid growing up in Casper, it seemed like we had depredation seasons pretty much every year. Does the department still do that? I mean, I haven't heard of one in 20 years, 30 years.
Well, I'm the last one I remember, Director Talbot and I were probably the last two that got to enjoy very cold weekends in Lusk, Wyoming in the early 90s on mule deer hunts, where mule deer in Niobrara County were out of control, and we had 2 or 3 landowners were having huge damage issues, and so as I recall, that was the last depredation hunting season we had under Chapter 34. So to answer your question, Pat, we have not done anything since in the last 20 plus years.
Okay. Why is, I mean, just no need, or why is that?
Mr. President, members of the commission, the commission still has the authority to implement those damage hunts under the regulations, but we just haven't seen the need to do that.
I think Commission President Culver, Commissioner Crank, I think part of the deal is that we try to adjust hunting seasons to address that, because those depredation seasons are very labor intensive, and I'll get into that a little bit. You've got to have many employees on the ground, you have to have landowner buy-in, you have to have commissioner buy-in, and so we can address that through a regular hunting season or through just a regular Chapter 56 damage lethal take permit to address a few animals. It just is a much more effective way. So the Chapter 56 brown card, again, those are just the examples where how we use it. The green card, for the fish division, fish only, very few animals. So if they're doing like electrofishing or something like that, they're one of their responsibilities, they do it under their green card. Brown and green take cards. These are not just issued randomly. We take the issuance of them very seriously. As it states here, they're at the discretion of Brian. Brian issues them approves them for all employees. We have a mandatory department training program that they have to take, which includes the law, the reg, and firearm safety and familiarization. They submit a request form to their SOUP. Their SOUP approves it, and then we get them through the training. And then that permit take card remains valid until such time the employee no longer works for us, or we ask for it to be surrendered by the Wildlife Division. So again, this is these are very highly scrutinized, at times public events, and again, we want to make sure it happens with the most professionalism and respect for both our publics and the animal that's going to be taken. Again, no big surprise, various examples of, when we have to lethally take wildlife. Deer in the fence, the injured bird there in the middle, and then the fish division doing some electrofishing. So the Chapter 56 permit, this is more for planned events, whether it's research, again, damage, human health and safety, disease, or damage purposes. We've had several, especially with human health disease concerns, i.e. tularemia up in the northeast part of the state. And another one we're seeing more and more is with the increase of cottontail rabbits in certain parts of the state, the damage that they're doing to vehicles, etc., creating a safety hazard for people driving those vehicles, believe it or not. So again, we have to have a written request and justification. It's just not, I want to, go remove X number of critters. They have to have a very specific justification, and that justification has to meet the requirements of Chapter 56. Again, it runs through me. I look at it, I work with the person submitting to make sure it meets all the statutory and regulatory requirements, and then Chief Nesvik then gives it the final approval. So there's quite a process in reviewing these. So this is where the commission comes in. So this take is to address damage caused by big game or game birds. The regional supervisor is required to consult with their local commissioner and get their approval for the species, number of species, time frame, etc., that they're requesting to be removed. So basically, the commissioner has to give us approval to take big game or game birds for damage purposes. And then they're all just spells out, dates, reason for take, who can take them, and then they have to, end of the calendar year, they have to submit a written document of everything that was conducted underneath that permit. Again, commissioners, again, are involved in this. Just want to reiterate that point that, again, we have to work with our local district commissioner for damage purposes to rule lethal take of big game and game birds. Another big one that we've been working on last several years, that hasn't been a big deal this year or last year, but back in the early mid-2000s was urban deer permits. With the expansion of deer into urban environments and the concern of damage and conflict in those urban environments, we put together a protocol on how to address this. And one thing that a lot of these towns wanted to do was just come in and start lethally removing these deer. And of course, one of the problems is people are feeding these deer, drawing these deer in there. And so we put together a committee and made a commitment that if we're going to allow municipalities to lethally remove deer, they have to have an ordinance in effect that prohibits the feeding of deer. In many towns, also the ordinance expands into game birds, trophy game, wild turkeys, all kinds of things. Basically everything that's kind of considered, game animals, excluding passerine birds, your songbirds, your bird feeder birds and things like that. So we weren't just going to allow cities to 56 permit without them trying to address the problem of urban deer feeding, because that's the root of the problem, is the urban deer feeding. And so these are the many reasons why we address urban deer and through the lethal take permit. So we have 18 municipalities that currently have these Chapter 56 urban deer permits. We issue about 4 to 5 a year. The latest ones have been Cwd, Sheridan, DuBois, Sundance, Thermop, and East Thermop. Of course, all those have to have and do have in place a ordinance banning the feeding of certain wildlife species, and if they're going to take deer again, they have to specifically outline that feeding a deer is prohibited under their count or their city or municipality code. We issue a permit to those. We obviously, how many can you take and what sex, where they can take them, the dates for taking, and the key one is CWD testing. Every animal that's taken under an urban deer lethal take permit is tested for CWD, and then those that are suitable for donation are then donated, and again, it's the municipality that has to deal with the donation. And several of them actually process them and then donate them, and some just donate the whole carcass and leave it up to the individual to process. And this has worked out very well, very, very well, and we haven't had any really feedback. I think Cwd, when they got theirs, was it, Alan, the last couple of years, Cwd had theirs. Little blowback, and I think they're reevaluating that last I knew, but again, the other places, it's just worked out great, really worked out great. Sundance was kind of one of the first ones. A lot of these are issued to their chief of police, and then either have their police officers or they hand select individuals of the town with the game warden's approval to actually go out and do the lethal removal. And a lot of it's done at night, you know, so it's not, you know, being seen by a lot of people. Okay, the depredation hunting season, Chapter 34. Again, very specific that these seasons are to address damage or damage to growing cultivated crops, damage to livestock, bees, hives, or honey by trophy game animals, or we have some type of disease issue. And of course, disease issue is probably the one that we would do, probably not through this just because of the concerns if I have to buy a license and then I find out that it's unedible, then I'm probably not going to participate. Again, we're going to require written consent approval of the district commissioner where this hunt would occur and the landowners involved. So even before we were to come to the commissioners, we'd make sure the appropriate landowners agree to this or involved, and then get your district commissioner approval. Again, as we said earlier, we haven't done one of these since I think it was 1994. Again, we spell out, you know, who, what, where, when, why, how. We have to have department employees in the field. I know that last bullet's kind of dark, but all hunters shall be supervised or directed by department or landowner. So we can actually say, if you have one of these depredation licenses, you will go hunt that hayfield. You will go hunt landowner A's property. You will hunt from 8 to 12. I mean, we can get that specific. And again, the deal is to maximize harvest with minimal effort to address a lot of times management concerns and the damage. And to apply, you actually fill out an application, submit that to the regional office in the area where you're interested to be considered for a depredation hunt, and we keep those on file till the end of the year, and then we throw them out, and then we start over again. Used to be, you'd stand in line at the Cheyenne office or the Casper office or wherever, and you started at 8 o'clock hand issuing licenses, and the line would be 200 or 300 deep for 50 licenses, and if you were 51 to 300, you're not a happy camper. It got pretty wild at times. Were you around those days? Yeah, it would. Yep, there's some classic photos of lines out and wrapped around the building at the old Cheyenne office wanting people to get these licenses, because this is above and beyond your normal allocation of licenses except for elk. And so this depredation license allowed you to possibly take an additional deer or possibly additional elk if you haven't maxed out on your statutory limit of 3. And then we have some unique statutes where landowners can actually take certain species of wildlife for certain situations. So 23.3.115, any black bear, mountain lion, gray wolf with an asterisk basically says, you know, the asterisk will get down there afterwards. Bobcat, weasel, badger, gray, red, fox, or muskrat doing damage to private property may be immediately taken and killed by the owner, employee, or lessee of the property. And then 23.3.114 is very specific to beavers. Beavers flooding meadows, damming irrigation system, or constructing dams, ponds dangerous to livestock on privately owned or state lands may immediately be taken by the landowner, employee, agent of the landowner, or leasee of state lands. And that's, state lands is added to that one for beavers, but on the other one, it's top one, it's just on their their property. And then the killing of black bear, mountain lion, bobcat, or gray wolf shall be reported to the nearest game warden. And then the interesting part about the wolf is that gray wolf doing damage to private property means actual biting, wounding, grasping, or killing of livestock, or a dog, or chasing, molesting, or harassing a livestock, or a dog by a wolf that would indicate to a reasonable person the actual biting, wounding, grasping, or killing of the livestock or dog is likely to occur at any moment. And that's right out of regulation and statute. And then those brown cards do not give department employees justification to take animals under these conditions. We would give an annual Chapter 56 permit and or a wildlife services contract. And actually, we do Chapter 56 permits for the taking of wolves, but they're highly scrutinized by both Brian and myself before any lethal take is removed, before any lethal take is conducted. And then, as stated earlier, we really don't deal with lethal removal of predators as defined by statutes. You know, citizens, private contractors, businesses, a lot of times do that, but we do, you know, make some exceptions with certain situations. You know, elderly folks, handicapped folks, or someone just needs a hand, and we do loan out a lot of traps. We give out a lot of traps in Casper and all our regional offices, mainly for skunks and raccoons. And then we work with our local municipal animal control officers on some of these removals. And then if there's a disease or injured, and it's highly, you know, visible and needs immediate attention, we'll look at those too. But overall, predatory animals are not on our list of things that we address with regards to lethal take or conflict. So in summary, that was just a quick overview of kind of the department's and commission's role in lethal taking of wildlife. Again, it's something you commissioners have or may be asked to engage in, especially with damage. And so I just wanted to give you a quick overview of kind of the law, the regs, and the situations we deal with. So with that, any questions?
No, thank you very much. I think that was a good overview on what I know a lot of department employees feel is one of the least desirable parts of the job, the constant having to dispatch sick or wounded animals, you know, or a problem bear or whatever. Regardless of what you read in the paper, I know it's something they hate to do. But thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Mr. President?
Yes.
Scott, could you address what Mr. President just talked about? You know, when we're looking at grizzly bears, everyone says there shall be no hunting, and that's wrong. But if there is no hunting, then our employees have to go kill those grizzly bears that are causing grief. And I mean, I've heard and I believe it's true that those folks that work with those bears absolutely hate to have to kill a bear. I mean, is that accurate? I mean, can you embellish on that at all?
I think when all of us wildlife professionals got into this job, we knew that was part of the job, but it's not a part of the job that we want to do or look forward to, but we know we have to do it and we do it well. But, you know, I'll just speak for myself. You know, there's nothing worse than having to put down a doe antelope fawn or a deer fawn or anything. It just rips your heart out. But, you know, deep down inside, that's what you have to do because, you know, the animal's not going to survive. It's the life that it will have suffering is bad. But to answer your question, Commissioner Crank, is that I don't think any of our people enjoy doing that. They know they have to do it because it's, you know, what's needed for the species conservation and the big picture. You know, we try to look at the big picture versus every individual animal. But yeah, you know, whether it's a grizzly bear, wolf, elk, whatever. I mean, we just know it's the right thing to do, and that's what we're dedicated to do. It's all part of conservation.
You know, and I said it kind of poorly. I shouldn't. I said I blamed it on the papers. It's not papers. It's social media. I know that in the past I've seen where some of our employees have had to put down bears, and you know that it tears them up to do it. And then to see them get ripped on social media bothers me, to be honest with you. And also our employees that live in, like in part of my district, where we have really high deer populations, and it's just a constant string of phone calls to dispatch those poor deer that get hit by cars. You know, boy, that's a tough part of the job. I respect them for what they do, putting those animals out of their misery, but I'd sure hate to do it.
You know, we're seeing, you know, as Wyoming changes, you know, people maybe moving in that aren't familiar with Wyoming's wildlife, you know, where calls for whether it's actual conflict or an injured wildlife, whether it's a robin to a elk, I mean, are obviously increasing. I mean, we have several warden districts. I mean, a good part of their time is spent dealing with nuisance or injured wildlife calls, and it can be time consuming.
And it should be recognized that the department's done a lot in the past to help alleviate this problem with the cooperation that we've done with the highway department on overpasses, with fencing, hay yards, things like that.
Right.
We've greatly reduced the number of animals that had to be removed.
That's correct.
Too.
And then, like I said, even on our everyday, you know, stuff, our guys or folks, guys, gals, or employees are always looking at ways to minimize, you know, conflict and having to put things down, whether it's, you know, putting up different speed limits to slow people down, or dynamic messaging signs. You know, those are the big tool now, moving those around during migrations, and, you know, elk on road or deer on road or deer migration. And, you know, during the eclipse, we were able to have the big signs on all the highways say slow down wildlife on road, because, you know, right at the beginning of the eclipse we had 3 moose, Brian? 3 moose hit and 2 moose. And so YDOT, thanks to Mark Nelson's working in that command center, that they put that up for us for 3 days, 4 days, which, you know, probably helped several critters on the road, because again, a lot of those people that were in the state had no clue, you know, what's going to be on Wyoming highways.
Well, and Mr. President, I mean, the moose were between Cheyenne and Chugwater, right? I mean, who would think they'd hit a moose between Cheyenne and Chugwater, Wyoming?
Yeah, it's amazing, you know, last several years, you know, we've had, I think that's the 3rd or 4th moose that's been killed there as they start, you know, moving out of the eastern part, Laramie Peak, Snowy Range. But yeah, it's not a truly rewarding part of the job, but again, our folks do it very professionally and respectful, and know it's something they have to do.
And I was just thinking, I imagine that the department's Bear Wise program has saved the life of many a bear.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that. And, you know, that's a big thing. You know, we just put Dusty Lassiter on full time to run that program. That's been a very successful program in the Northeast. And actually, you know, whether it's bears living in lion country, living in wolf country, you know, those are all programs that we use to minimize conflict and hopefully minimize the lethal removal of any of those species.
Any other questions or comments for Scott? Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
What is the department's pleasure? Would you like to move another agenda item today, or shall we recess for the day and pick up the rest of the agenda tomorrow? Okay. All right, so let's, I'll issue a call to the public. Is there anybody here that would like to approach the podium and visit about any topic whatsoever? Come on, we're an easy bunch.
President, can I then brief you on the open house spot?
Yes,
okay.
please.
And some of this is a message for those folks who are here, but Commissioner Rael came up with the idea of having an informal gathering so people could have a chance to chat with each of you and hear your perspective, and also get to meet some folks from Cheyenne who don't get up to Lovell that often as well. So that's what we'll kind of kick off at 4 o'clock. And in the midst of that, anybody from the public who is interested in entering a raffle for the lifetime licenses that Commissioner Rael and all the generous donors were able to help get can do that. They can see me at that table right there and get registered and get a ticket for that raffle. It's not a raffle for commissioners or for Game and Fish employees. I'm sorry to tell you, most of the raffle will go to youth as well. And also we have a whole bunch of folks for you to get to know too from the Cwd region who are here and are going to spend the evening here chatting with anybody from the commission or from the public. So all that we'll get going kind of soon on that front, but if they'd like to see me back at that table, I'll get them entered in the raffle.
Sounds good. Thank you. And one other thing, I see we've been joined by Mrs. Rael. We want to thank you very much for all your efforts in putting this evening's festivities together. We very much appreciate it. Thank you, Jenny. Okay, with that, we will adjourn until What time do we pick up tomorrow?
8 a.m.
8 o'clock?
Mr. President, I would just note that David Rael married so far above his head that I can't imagine how he did that, but it's a good thing we have Ginny.
8 o'clock tomorrow. And I agree with what you said there.
Real quickly, though, if I may, Mr. President, introduce my mother-in-law next to my better half, Sherry. Not very often do commissioners get to introduce their mother-in-law, or do they want to? No.
Sherry, welcome. Okay, and we will reconvene at 8 o'clock tomorrow then.